She had $17 in her bank account and a mother on a ventilator. The surgery was $40,000. The deadline was Friday morning. It was Thursday night. Nora Chin stood on the sidewalk outside the Aldrich building with her hands shaking inside her coat pockets and her breath fogging the cold air in short, quick bursts. The building was 40 stories of black glass and steel, and it rose above the street the way a threat rises. Slowly, completely, leaving no room for anything else. Everyone in this city knew what the Aldrich building was. Everyone knew whose name was on the top floor. And everyone knew that walking in there without an invitation was the kind of decision a person usually didn't get to regret. Nora had spent 3 weeks not walking in. 3 weeks of loan applications that came back denied. 3 weeks of charity hotlines and hold music and a soft-voiced woman at St. Michael's Hospital financial office who said, "We understand your situation, Ms. Chin, but we do need a decision by Friday morning." 3 weeks of calling aunts and uncles and cousins she hadn't spoken to in years, listening to the silence on their end that meant no before they even said the word. She had gone to the bank twice. She had sat across from a man with a laminated badge and a sympathetic expression, and he had typed things into a computer and shaken his head in a way that made her feel like she was already too late. And every night she had driven to St. Michael's and sat in the chair beside room 4C and held her mother's hand, warm, still, breathing only because a machine decided to, and listened to the ventilator and the monitors and the particular silence of a room where someone is waiting to die or be saved. Her mother's name was Grace Chin. She was 51 years old. She had worked the checkout line at a Kroger for 14 years to put Nora through school. She wore the same winter coat for 7 seasons because the coat still worked fine and there were better uses for money. She kept a garden in their apartment's 1 square foot of balcony. Tomatoes in the summer, small yellow flowers in spring. The surgery could save her. Without it, the doctor had said carefully and kindly, and without looking away, they were looking at days. Nora looked at the Aldrich building. She looked at the revolving door. She thought about her mother's garden. Then she walked in. The lobby smelled of marble and cold air and expensive cologne from men who moved through it like they owned the space between their footsteps. A security desk sat in the center. 2 men, broad-shouldered, watching her before she'd taken 3 steps. "I need to see Damien Cross," she said. The closer guard looked at her with the particular expression of someone who has heard 10,000 requests and granted about 4 of them. "Do you have an appointment?" "No. Sir has no openings tonight." "I know." Nora's hands were still shaking. She pressed them against her sides. "I'm not here for an appointment. I'm here because I need help and I have nothing left to lose, and I will wait in this lobby all night if that's what it takes." The guard's expression didn't change. But the other one, the older one with a silver earpiece and eyes that had seen longer things, picked up a phone. He said something too low for Nora to hear. He listened. He looked at her once, carefully, the way someone reads a label. Then he said, 42nd floor. "Someone will meet you." The elevator was mirrored on all 4 walls. Nora watched herself rise 42 floors. She looked like what she was. A 22-year-old girl in a coat that was too thin for November, with dark circles under her eyes and hair she hadn't properly brushed since Tuesday, and a manila folder pressed against her chest that held a hospital bill and a surgery estimate and the name of her mother's doctor in bold at the top. She had rehearsed what to say. She had planned to be calm and professional and clear. She had planned to say, "I am offering myself as a personal employee. A cleaner. A driver. Anything legal. Any amount of time. I just need $40,000 tonight and I will work every day for the rest of my working life to pay it back." The elevator opened. A man in a dark suit met her. Late 30s, jaw like a door, the kind of stillness that came from training rather than temperament. "This way," he said. He led her down a hallway carpeted in charcoal gray. The walls were bare except for one painting. A dark seascape, waves frozen mid-break, that made the hallway feel like the edge of something. He opened a door at the end. The office beyond it was large and dim. One wall was entirely glass, floor to ceiling, and the city spread out behind it in 10,000 points of amber and white light. A man sat behind a desk the size of a dining table. He did not look up immediately. He finished reading something, set it aside, and then he looked up. His eyes were dark gray. His face was the kind of face that had decided at some point to give nothing away for free. "Sit down," he said. Nora sat. "Talk," he said. She opened her mouth. Every rehearsed sentence evaporated. What came out instead was the truth, raw and without armor. My mother is dying, she said. The surgery costs $40,000. I have 17. I am here to offer you whatever I have left. My time, my work, my service, anything you need, if you will write that check tonight. She set the manila folder on the desk and slid it across to him. Damien Cross looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached out and opened the file. He read the first page. He turned to the second. And then he went completely still. Not the stillness of thought. Not the stillness of calculation. The stillness of a man who has just seen something that shouldn't exist. His 2 bodyguards stepped forward without being told. Nora's breath stopped. She had no idea what was in that file that could make a man like Damien Cross look like that. She was about to find out. The folder sat open on his desk. Damien's hand was flat against the page. Not gripping it. Just flat, the way a man's hand goes when his body is working to stay controlled and his mind is somewhere far away. His eyes moved once across the patient name at the top of the file. Then they moved to the date of birth. Then to the emergency contact field 3 lines down where it listed a husband, deceased, and 1 daughter. He closed the file. He set both hands on the desk. Where did you get this? His voice was completely even. Nora blinked. From the hospital. St. Michael's. It's my mother's medical. I know what it is. He looked at her. How old are you? 22. What is your mother's full name? Nora's hands gripped the edge of her seat. Something in his voice, not threatening but absolute, made her feel like she was being weighed against a scale she couldn't see. Grace Chin, she said. Formerly Grace Cross. The room went silent. Not the ordinary silence of a pause. A different silence. Deep and specific, the kind that forms around something irreversible. Cross, Damien said. She changed it back after. Nora stopped. After my father died. She said she wanted a clean start. I never understood why. Damien looked at the closed folder. He did not explain anything. He reached for his phone, dialed 3 digits and said, "Get Dr. Hallen on the line. Personal line. Now." Then he set the phone down and looked at Nora with those gray eyes that held nothing readable. You said you came here to offer yourself in exchange for the surgery cost, he said. Yes. Did anyone send you here? No. Did anyone tell you to come to me specifically? Everyone in this city knows your name, she said. You're the only person I could think of who could write that check tonight. He swallowed. I'm not asking for charity. I know what I'm asking for is, I know it's a lot. I'll work whatever you need as long as you need. Her voice broke. He pressed it back. She's my mother. She's all I have. And she runs out of time tomorrow morning. Damien looked at her for a long time. Nora looked back. He was not what Damien expected. Not naive, not reckless, not calculating. He was just exhausted. Down to the bone, 3 weeks without sleeping, end of the road, exhausted. Her coat had a fraying hem. Her shoes were the kind of practical flat that meant she stood all day somewhere. Her eyes were the reddest part of her face. But she had walked into the most dangerous building in the city for her mother. Without flinching. Without a plan other than honesty. Damien had sat across from senators and crime bosses and men with weapons under their jackets, and he had watched nearly all of them flinch at some point. This 22-year-old girl had not flinched. Tell me about your mother, he said. Nora looked at him, surprised by the question. She worked at Kroger, she said. For 14 years. She got up at 5 every morning and she never complained about it. Not once. She exhaled slowly. She made the best congee. She could fix anything. A toaster, a broken zipper, a bad day. She kept these little yellow flowers on the balcony even in winter. She put them under a grow lamp and checked them every morning like they were, Nora's voice caught, like they were her responsibility. Like they depended on her. She pressed her lips together. She is the best person I have ever known, she said. Quiet. Absolute. Damien's phone rang on his desk. He picked it up. Hallen. Pause. I need you at St. Michael's tonight. Room 4C. Grace Cross, she's listed as Chin. Yes, tonight. I don't care what you have on tomorrow, clear it. He paused again. Because I said so. He hung up. He looked at Nora. Dr. Hallen is the best cardiac surgeon in this state, he said. He will be at St. Michael's within the hour. The bill will be handled. Nora's mouth opened. No sound came out. I have one condition, Damien said. She waited. You will not leave that hospital tonight until I come there myself. Nora stared at him. Why? He looked down at the closed folder on his desk. His expression was something between controlled and fractured, the way a wall looks just before a crack runs through it. Because I have some questions for your mother, he said. And because there are things you don't know yet. About your family. About why she changed her name. He stood. Go to the hospital. No. Before you leave this building, my man will give you a card. If anyone tries to stop you getting to that room, at the hospital, in the parking lot, anywhere, you call the number on that card. Nora stood slowly, still unsteady. I don't understand what's happening. I know, he said. I'll explain when I see you there. She picked up the manila folder from the desk. He didn't watch her go. He waited until the door clicked shut behind her. Then he opened the folder again, slowly, and looked at the emergency contact field. The husband listed as deceased was named Thomas Cross. Thomas had been Damien's older brother. And Damien had stood at Thomas's wife's funeral 9 years ago. A simple service, a gray mourning, a casket he had personally paid for, and he had believed every single thing he was told. Someone had let him grieve a woman who was alive. He already knew whose hands had arranged that. He was going to need to be very careful about what he did next. Damien drove to St. Michael's himself. No driver. No escort. Just his own car. A black Mercedes that smelled of leather and coffee, parked in the hospital's east lot at 11:47 p.m. He sat in it for 3 minutes before going in. He looked at the building. The lit windows. The ambulance bay where a paramedic leaned against a wall in the cold, eating something from a wrapper. He had not been inside a hospital since the night his brother Thomas died. A car accident on Route 9, 7 years before Grace's supposed death. Damien had driven to the hospital at 2 in the morning and arrived 17 minutes too late, and he had sat in a waiting room chair until dawn because he didn't know where else to go. He was the only Cross left after that. Or he had thought so. He got out of the car. The night nurse at the 4th floor station looked up when he stepped off the elevator. He said Dr. Hallen's name and his own, and she checked a list and waved him down the corridor without another word. Room 4C was at the end. The door was half open. Light from the room spilled into the hallway, and he could hear the steady mechanical exhale of the ventilator before he reached it. He stopped in the doorway. Nora was in the chair beside the bed. She had the folder in her lap, but she wasn't looking at it. She was looking at her mother. One hand wrapped around the older woman's wrist, her thumb moving in small, slow circles the way you touch something you're afraid to lose. Grace Cross, Grace Chin, lay in the hospital bed in the particular stillness of someone kept alive by machinery. She was thin. Her hair had gone almost fully gray. But her face, even in this state, had a specific quality. A fineness of feature, something dignified that illness hadn't touched. Damien looked at her and felt something pull loose in the back of his memory. He had met Grace twice in his life. At Thomas's wedding and at a Christmas dinner the following year. She had been warm and sharp and funny in equal measure. She had laughed at his jokes even when they weren't very good. She had touched Thomas's arm every few minutes without seeming to know she was doing it, the way people touch things that are dear to them. He had liked her immediately. And then Thomas had died, and then Grace had died, and then Damien had been alone. He stepped into the room. Nora looked up. Something in her face relaxed slightly at the sight of him. Or perhaps at the sight that he had actually come. Dr. Hallen is reviewing the scans, she said quietly. He said he'll have a plan within the hour. Damien nodded. He moved to stand on the other side of the bed. He looked at Grace for a long moment. How long has she been on the ventilator? 11 days. What happened? Her heart. Nora's thumb kept moving against her mother's wrist. She'd had a murmur for years. She always said it was nothing. She didn't want to spend the money on specialists. And then 11 days ago she stopped. She collapsed in the Kroger parking lot after her shift. A stranger called 911. Damien looked at the monitors. The numbers ticked steadily. The green line of the heart trace made its patient peaks and valleys. Nora, he said. She looked up. Your mother never mentioned my brother to you. Thomas Cross. No. She shook her head slowly. She didn't talk about my father's family at all. She said, she paused. She said that side of the family was gone. That there was nobody left. Damien absorbed this. That is not true, he said. Nora's hand stilled on her mother's wrist. What do you mean? Your father's name was Thomas Cross. My brother. He watched her face. When Thomas died, 7 years ago, your mother was still alive. We were not estranged. There was no reason for her to disappear. He paused. But 2 years after Thomas died, I received word that Grace had been killed in a car accident on the I-78 near Allentown. I received a death certificate. I received a funeral notice. I sent flowers to a service I was told I couldn't attend because her family, the Chens, had requested privacy. Nora stared at him. Her hand had lifted completely off her mother's wrist. Someone faked my mother's death, she said. Not a question. A slow, disbelieving statement. Someone filed documents, Damien said. Someone made it official enough that I stopped looking. He held her gaze. And someone made sure that you and your mother were completely cut off from the Cross family. From me. From everything Thomas left behind. What did Thomas leave behind? Nora said carefully. Damien looked at her for a long, considered moment. His estate. His assets. His share of the family holdings. He paused. Which, at the time of his death, were worth approximately $3.5 million. And which, in his will, were left to his wife and any children in full. The ventilator exhaled. The monitor beeped. Nora did not move. $3.5 million, she said. Yes. And my mother never saw a dollar of it. No. Then where? That, Damien said, is the question I have been asking myself since the moment I opened your folder tonight. He looked down at Grace. Because if your mother was declared dead, her inheritance would have passed down the legal chain. To the next of kin in the Cross family. Nora's eyes widened slowly. Who is the next of kin after her? Damien's jaw tightened. My cousin, he said. Gerald Cross. Who called me personally the day of Grace's supposed funeral to say how devastated he was. He pulled out his phone. Not to call Gerald. To call his attorney. Because Gerald had just made the worst miscalculation of his life. He had left a witness alive. And that witness had just walked into Damien Cross's building. Dr. Hallen came to the room at midnight. He was a small man with large hands and the unhurried manner of someone who had delivered serious news enough times to know that rushing it didn't help. He shook Nora's hand, nodded to Damien, and opened his tablet to show the scans. The valve is significantly deteriorated, he said. Replacement surgery is the correct course. It is also urgent. He glanced at Nora. Had this waited another few days, we would not be having a conversation about surgery. Can you do it? Nora asked. I can do it tomorrow morning. I've already spoken to the charge nurse about the OR schedule. He closed the tablet. She will need to rest tonight. I'll want her stable and prepped by 7 a.m. He said a few more things. Practical things, recovery timeline, risk percentage, what Nora could expect in the hours after. Nora listened to all of it and nodded and kept her face together, and then Dr. Hallen shook her hand again and left. The door clicked shut. Nora sat back down. She pressed her hands between her knees. Her shoulders dropped. 3 weeks of held together collapsed in about 4 seconds. Not into crying, just into a deep, full-body exhale that looked like a person setting down something very heavy. Damien watched her. He had seen men come out of crisis this way. The release that happened when the immediate danger passed and the body finally realized it was allowed to come down. She's going to be okay, Nora said. Not to him. To herself. To the room. She's going to be okay. Yes, Damien said. Nora looked up at him. Her eyes were wet but she wasn't crying. Not yet. Why are you doing this? Truly. She's family, he said. You didn't know that when I walked in. No, he said. I didn't. He sat in the second chair. The one on the opposite side of the bed, the spare chair that hospitals put in rooms for the second person who loves someone. He looked at Grace. Tell me what your life looked like, he said. After your father died. Nora was quiet for a moment. She looked at her mother too. I was 13 when he died, she said. I barely remember him. He got sick fast. It was only about 8 months from diagnosis to, she stopped. Afterward we moved. Mom said the apartment was too expensive on her own. We moved to a smaller place. And then another. And then the Kroger job which paid better than the other things she tried, so we stayed. She never remarried. No. A small pause. She dated someone once when I was about 16. A man named Ron. He was nice enough. But she ended it after a few months. I asked her why and she said, Nora's mouth curved faintly, a half-sad thing. Some people only find their person once, Nora. The rest is just company. Damien was quiet. Thomas had said something similar once. At that Christmas dinner, after too much wine and a conversation that had gotten sentimental. He had looked at Grace across the table and said quietly, I won the lottery, Damien. I know it. I know every day. Thomas had been 34. He had not made it to 40. She never talked about the Cross family, Nora said. I asked once, when I was maybe 15 doing a family history thing for school. She said your family was gone. That there was nobody. He looked at Damien. I believed her. Why would she lie about that? She may not have lied, Damien said carefully. She may have been told you were both in danger if she reached out. She may have been given a reason to believe that staying hidden was the only way to keep you safe. Nora stared at him. Gerald threatened her. I believe so. He threatened a widow with a teenage daughter. Damien's jaw was tight. Gerald Cross is the kind of man who calculates what he can get away with and then goes slightly further. He always has been. He paused. When Thomas and I were young, Gerald was our father's nephew. He was always at the periphery, always close enough to benefit, never close enough to be responsible for anything. His voice went flat. He is the most expensive kind of person. The kind who costs other people everything. Nora looked at the bed. At her mother's thin, still hand. She worked herself into this, Nora said quietly. $3 million that was hers, that my father wanted her to have, and she spent 14 years on her feet at a checkout line. Because Gerald wanted it and she was afraid. The words landed in the room like stones into water. Damien said nothing. He didn't need to. She didn't even tell me, Nora said. Her voice cracked on the last word. Just once. She pressed her fist against her mouth for a moment. She carried this alone for 9 years. She was afraid to tell me. She was afraid to reach out. She just kept going. Kept showing up. Kept making congee and tending her flowers and putting me first every day, while Gerald Cross was living off money that should have been hers. Damien looked at her. This girl who had come to his building with $17 and a folder and love too large for her circumstances. He thought about what her mother must have felt, making that choice every morning to protect her daughter by staying small and invisible and afraid. He thought about what kind of courage that was. A different kind than what he understood. Quieter. Longer. Without applause. She was protecting you, he said. I know. Nora's voice was raw. I know she was. But she didn't have to do it alone. She didn't have to, she pressed her lips together. All those years. All those hard years. And the whole time there was family out there. There was money that was ours. There was, she stopped. She looked at Grace's face. She deserved better, she said softly. She deserved so much better than what she got. The ventilator breathed for Grace. The monitor kept its patient count. And Damien Cross, who had not allowed himself to grieve anyone since his brother, felt something break open quietly behind his ribs. He did not show it. But he felt it. And later in the car he would sit for a long time before he started the engine. Because somewhere in this city, Gerald Cross was asleep with no idea that his careful lie had just unraveled at both ends. That was about to change. Gerald Cross found out at 9 in the morning. Not from Damien. From his assistant. A wiry, nervous man named Paul who monitored certain things on Gerald's behalf, certain names in certain systems, a precaution Gerald had maintained for years. Paul called Gerald on his private line while Gerald was eating breakfast at his dining room table in his 9th-floor condominium. Eggs Benedict, fresh orange juice. The morning newspaper opened to the financial section. There was activity at St. Michael's Hospital last night, Paul said. Gerald set down his fork. What kind of activity? A Dr. Hallen was brought in. Cardiac surgery scheduled this morning. The patient file. A pause. The patient is listed as Grace Chin. Formerly Cross. Gerald's orange juice glass was halfway to his mouth. It went back to the table very slowly. She's alive, he said. Sir. She's been at St. Michael's for 11 days. And, Paul's voice tightened. The surgery was authorized last night by Damien Cross. He's listed as the funding guarantor. Gerald stood up. His chair scraped back against the marble floor. He knows, Paul said carefully. Or he's close enough to knowing that it doesn't matter. Gerald's mind moved fast. 9 years of careful maintenance. 9 years of a death certificate that had never been questioned, a small inheritance cleverly redirected through 3 layers of legal structure. A woman kept too afraid to surface and a daughter kept ignorant of everything. 9 years of waking up every morning with no loose ends. One loose end. One girl with $17 and a manila folder who had walked into the wrong building. Where is the daughter now? Gerald said. At the hospital. She's been there overnight. Gerald picked up his coffee mug. Set it down without drinking. Walked to the window. The city below moved in its ordinary morning patterns. Cabs, pedestrians, delivery trucks. She doesn't know everything yet, he said. No, sir. But Damien will tell her. Then we move before he does. Gerald turned from the window. His face had settled into something clean and executive, the way it always did when he shifted from breakfast to business. I need 2 things. First, pull the original estate documents. If there's any technical challenge to the inheritance claim that I can file before Damien gets to a judge, I want it filed today. He walked back to the table. Second, I need someone to speak with the girl directly. Before Damien does. Speak with her how? Paul said. Gerald's expression didn't change. Persuasively. He hung up. He picked up his fork. He finished his eggs Benedict. He was not a violent man, Gerald Cross. He had always considered violence to be an admission of limited imagination. He preferred pressure. He preferred to find the thing a person needed most and make it conditional on their silence. A girl with a sick mother and no money was not a complicated problem. She just needed the right offer at the right moment. He was already thinking about what that offer should look like. He did not think about what happened when Damien Cross found out someone had threatened his family. That was the miscalculation that would cost him everything. At St. Michael's, Grace's surgery began at 8:15 a.m. Nora sat in the cardiac surgery waiting room on the 3rd floor with a paper cup of coffee she'd gotten from the vending machine and hadn't touched. The cup had gone cold 40 minutes ago. She was staring at the door that the surgical team had walked through. Damien had come back. He had gone home at 3 a.m. and he had come back at 7:30 with a paper bag from a bakery she didn't recognize. 2 cups of real coffee and a croissant she didn't eat but held on to because holding something helped. He sat 2 seats away and worked on his phone in the quiet, efficient way of someone who never actually stops working but knows how to make it unobtrusive. She looked at him sideways. "Can I ask you something?" she said. He looked up. "Last night you said Gerald had the most to gain from hiding my mother." She turned the coffee cup in her hands. "How much do you actually know about what he did?" "Enough," Damien said. "And what are you going to do about it?" He looked at her steadily. "The right things. In the right order." "That's not a real answer." "No," he agreed. "But it's the correct one for this moment." She looked back at the door. "I want to be involved," she said. "Whatever comes next, I want to know. He's my mother. The money was my father's. I deserve to be part of what happens." Damien put his phone down. He looked at her the way he'd been looking at her since the hospital folder, like he was recalculating something he thought he already understood. "You walked into my building last night," he said. "With no leverage, no protection and no idea what you were walking into. You did it for her." "Yes. That was either very brave or very reckless." "I know." "Which was it?" Nora held the cold coffee cup. "Both," she said. "Does it matter?" Something shifted in his expression. Brief, almost invisible. But there. His phone vibrated. He picked it up, read something, and his face changed completely. Not the volcanic stillness she'd seen in the office when he read the folder. Something sharper. Colder. He stood up. "Stay in this room," he said. "What's happening?" "Someone is on their way here." He looked at the door to the waiting room. "Someone Gerald sent." Norris did too. "How do you?" "I have people monitoring Gerald's communications." He looked at her directly. "Do not leave this floor. Do not speak to anyone you haven't met before. If someone approaches you with an offer of any kind, money, a deal, a settlement, you say nothing and you call me." He held her gaze long enough for her to nod. Then he walked out. The waiting room was quiet. A woman across the room flipped magazine pages without reading them. A man in the corner had his eyes closed. Nora sat back down. Her heart was beating too fast. She counted ceiling tiles. She counted the seconds between the ticking of the clock on the wall. 7 minutes passed. Then the door opened and a man walked in who didn't look like he was there for surgery. He was mid-40s, well-dressed, with a calm professional face and a legal pad under his arm. He looked around the room, found Nora, and moved toward her with the precise casualness of someone following a photograph. "Miss Chin." He sat in the chair beside her without being invited. "My name is Alan Marsh. I represent Gerald Cross. I understand you've been speaking with his cousin Damien." He opened the legal pad. "I want to talk to you about a settlement," he said. "A very generous one. Before this situation becomes something that hurts everyone." Nora looked at him. Her phone was in her hand. Her thumb was already on Damien's number. "How generous," she said. Not because she was considering it. Because she needed 30 seconds. The door at the far end of the waiting room opened. Damien walked back in. He saw Marsh. Marsh saw Damien. The legal pad closed. "Alan," Damien said. His voice was the quietest it had been since Nora met him. That specific quiet that wasn't calm. The quiet that came after the decision was already made. Marsh stood up. He was already backing toward the door. "This isn't the place," Marsh said. "No," Damien said. "It isn't. Because the place for this conversation is in front of a judge. With every document Gerald has touched in the last 9 years on the table." He looked at the man without blinking. "Tell him that. Tell him exactly that." Marsh left. The waiting room settled back into its ordinary silence. Damien came and sat in the chair Marsh had vacated. He looked at Nora. "You didn't take the call," he said. "You told me not to talk to anyone. I told you to call me. You were already coming through the door." He looked at her for a moment. "Good," he said. Across the room the clock ticked. Down the hall, somewhere behind that surgical door, Grace Cross was fighting to come back. And in a 9th-floor condominium across the city, Gerald Cross received a message from Alan Marsh and read it twice and understood for the first time in 9 years that he had run out of room. He just didn't know yet how completely. The surgery took 4 hours and 11 minutes. Dr. Hallen came through the door at 12:26 p.m. with his mask pulled down around his chin and his large hands at his sides, and he looked at Nora and said, "She did well. She's in recovery. You'll be able to see her in about an hour." Nora's knees went. She caught the back of the chair. Damien's hand was at her elbow before she had time to reach for anything else. One hand, steady and unhurried, holding the point where she'd started to tip. She didn't cry. He wanted to. But she pressed it back one more time and straightened and said, "Thank you," to Dr. Hallen, who nodded once and went back through the door. Then she looked at Damien. "She's okay," she said. Her voice was just air. "She's okay," he confirmed. He let go of her elbow. She sat down. He sat beside her. They didn't speak for a few minutes. The waiting room clock ticked. The woman across the room put down her magazine and pressed her hands together like a prayer. The man in the corner finally opened his eyes. Life went on doing what it did in waiting rooms. Damien pulled out his phone and made 3 calls in the space of 10 minutes. Short ones, precise ones, the kind that conveyed complete information in the minimum syllables. His attorney. Someone named Carver who said, "Done," before Damien finished the sentence. A third person whose name Nora didn't catch. She watched him without watching him. He was not what she had expected a man like him to be. She had expected cold. She had expected transaction. She had expected to walk into that office and find someone who would listen to her offer and make a counteroffer, and that would be the shape of it. She had not expected someone who sat in a hospital waiting room for hours. She had not expected someone who brought coffee from a good bakery. She had not expected the hand at her elbow. At 2 p.m. they moved to Grace's recovery room. Grace was conscious but only barely, that half-surface state of post-anesthesia where the eyes open but don't quite focus and the voice arrives in pieces. There were new lines in her face that Nora didn't remember from before. Or maybe she'd always been there and Nora hadn't wanted to see them. Nora held her hand. "Mom," she said. "Mom, the surgery's done. You're okay." Grace's eyes moved. They found Nora's face. "Nora," she said. Barely a sound. "I'm here. I'm right here." Grace's eyes slid further right. They found Damien, who stood at the door with his hands in his pockets and his face doing nothing recognizable. Something moved through Grace's expression. Not surprise. Not confusion. Something that looked like inevitability. Like a thing she had been waiting to happen for a very long time. "Damien," she said. "Grace." His voice was steady. "You look terrible." The ghost of something crossed Grace's face. "You look older." 9 years will do that. Grace's eyes closed. Opened again. "She came to you." Not a question. "Yes." "I told her, I always told her." Grace's voice faded. "I didn't want her near any of this." "I know," Damien said. "But she's more stubborn than you planned for." Grace turned her head back toward Nora. Her hand tightened weakly. "I'm sorry," she said. "Just that." "Don't," Nora said. Her voice cracked. "Don't apologize. Not today. Just get better." Grace's eyes closed again. The nurse came to adjust something and they stepped back and let her work. In the hallway, Damien made his fourth call. It went to someone at the district attorney's office. He spoke for 4 minutes. His voice was quiet and complete and he said Gerald Cross's name 3 times, each time with a specific document reference that the person on the other end clearly recognized. He hung up and looked at Nora. "What happens now?" she asked. "Gerald files for a protective injunction on the estate most likely. That buys him maybe a week." Damien put his phone away. "It doesn't matter. I've already had my attorney file the challenge to the original probate. The death certificate for your mother is fraudulent. That's verifiable. Once it's invalidated, the inheritance distribution from Thomas's estate gets reopened. Everything Gerald received through that chain goes under review." "How long does that take?" "Months," he said. "These things always take months. But the outcome, given the documentation we have, is not in question." He looked at her directly. "Your mother's share of Thomas's estate will be restored. Plus interest. Plus damages if she chooses to pursue Gerald civilly, which I will strongly encourage." Nora absorbed this. "And Gerald?" Damien's expression went flat. "Gerald has broken more laws than he knows I know about. The DA's office has been building a case on separate matters for 8 months. What I gave them today accelerates that timeline considerably. You've been investigating him already. I suspected he had manipulated certain financial structures inside the family trust years ago," Damien said. "I didn't have grounds for direct action. Today," his jaw tightened. "Today he sent a man to pressure a girl whose mother was in surgery. That was a mistake." Nora looked at him. "Why does it matter to you?" she said. "He stole from my mother." "Not from you." Damien was quiet for a moment. "He stole your mother," he said. "From me. From Thomas's memory. From the family your father thought he was leaving behind for both of you." He looked down the hallway. "Thomas was my brother. His wife and daughter were my family. 9 years ago Gerald decided that was worth $3.5 million. He looked back at Nora. "That is not something I am able to leave alone." Gerald's injunction was filed at 4 p.m. It was denied by 5:15. The judge, who had received documentation from Damien's attorney that afternoon and who was not a judge Gerald had ever managed to cultivate, ruled against the motion with a terseness that the attorney would later describe as almost personal. Gerald's phone rang at 5:30. It was the district attorney's office. He listened to the opening statement. He set the phone down on his desk and looked at his apartment. The clean lines, the marble counters, the 9th-floor view that had always felt like evidence of something he'd earned. He understood sitting there that it was over. Not the way things were over in films. Not with confrontation, not with someone in his face saying the words. Just over. The way a structure is over when you pull the one beam that was holding the rest. Quietly. Completely. He sat for a long time. Then he called his own attorney. Across the city, in a recovery room at St. Michael's, Grace Cross opened her eyes in the late afternoon and found her daughter and her brother-in-law in chairs on either side of her bed. She looked at them both. "You talked," she said. "For a while," Nora said. Grace looked at Damien. "Are you angry?" "At you?" "No." Pause. "At Gerald?" "Yes." "Don't do anything. It's already done," he said. "Get some rest." Grace looked at the ceiling. Then she said very quietly, "Thomas would have liked how she turned out." Damien looked at Nora. Nora was already looking at her mother. He would have been proud of you, Damien said. And he meant both of them. Grace came home 3 weeks later. Not to the small apartment with the 1-square-foot balcony. That lease had been let go 2 weeks into the hospital stay, the last bill unpaid, the key left in the building super's mailbox. She came home to a house on Birch Street. A proper house, white frame, 2 floors, a backyard with actual soil in it and a south-facing window in the kitchen that got light until 3 in the afternoon. Damien had arranged it. He had not made a speech about it. He had sent a single text to Nora, address attached. Keys are inside the mailbox. Move whenever she's ready. Nora had stared at the text for a long time. Then she typed back, "You don't have to do this." His reply had come in under 60 seconds. "I know." She hadn't argued further. The first morning in the Birch Street house, Grace sat in the kitchen in a wool cardigan and looked at the south-facing window for a long time. "There's room for a garden," she said. "On the windowsill," Nora confirmed. "And the yard." "I don't know anything about gardening." Grace looked at her. "I'll teach you." It was the first ordinary sentence she'd said since the hospital. Not about pain or fear or the past 9 years. Just "I'll teach you." Forward-facing. Future tense. Nora made tea and sat across from her mother and let the morning do its quiet work. Damien came to dinner on a Thursday. He arrived with a bottle of wine he'd clearly had someone select for him and a total absence of ceremony about it. Set it on the counter, sat at the kitchen table where Nora pointed, accepted a bowl of congee without comment and ate most of it. Grace watched him eat. "You never learned to cook either," she said. "Thomas did all the cooking in the family. He burned everything." "He tried very hard though." Grace smiled. It was the first full smile Nora had seen on her mother's face in 11 days of hospital and 3 weeks of recovery. Changed the whole room. Damien looked at his bowl. After dinner they sat on the back porch with cups of tea while the November air came in soft and cold. Grace had her cardigan and a wool blanket over her knees. Nora sat on the step below and Damien stood at the porch railing looking at the yard. "There's a garden center 3 blocks from here," Grace said. "They keep bulbs through December." "Tulips?" Damien asked. "Among other things." She watched him. "Thomas used to say you were the one who killed plants." "I killed 2 ferns and a succulent." "That's circumstantial." "That's 3 plants, Damien. The succulent barely counts." Grace laughed. It was a real laugh, short and warm and entirely unguarded, and it broke over the quiet porch like something that had been waiting a long time to happen. Nora turned to look at her mother. Grace was still smiling, her eyes bright, the wool blanket tucked around her knees and the tea warm in her hands. She looked like herself. Not the version that had been held together by fear for 9 years. Not the woman on the ventilator in room 4C. The version Nora remembered from childhood. Making congee on Sunday mornings, humming something she never named, checking her little yellow flowers before she did anything else. Present. Alive. Here. Nora turned back around. She didn't trust her voice yet. Damien had noticed. He didn't look at her directly. He just shifted his weight slightly and said to no one in particular, "The yard gets good light. A proper garden is possible." "You're not a garden person," Nora said. "No. But I'm told I can learn things." She looked at him sideways. "Who told you that?" "Last Tuesday." "I said that about something else entirely." "The principle applies." Grace was watching them the way mothers watch things they aren't going to comment on yet but are filing carefully away. There were dinners after that Thursday. Not every week. But regularly. The kind of regularly that becomes its own rhythm without anyone naming it. A Tuesday here, a Sunday there, Damien at the kitchen table with his jacket off for the first time and Grace telling him things about Thomas that he hadn't known, small things, ordinary things, the texture of a life lived alongside his brother that Damien had only seen from the outside. He listened to all of it. He never hurried her. One evening, over dishes, Nora said, "She seems lighter." "She's been carrying too much for too long," Damien said. "So have you." He handed her a plate to dry. She dried it. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I suppose I have." The kitchen was warm. The dishes clinked softly. Outside the Birch Street window, the first snow of the season fell in small, patient flakes. Neither of them moved to look at it. They didn't need to. Spring came to Birch Street the way it always does, slowly and then all at once. The garden happened in stages. Grace ordered bulbs in January. She started seeds on the kitchen windowsill in February in small paper cups labeled in her careful handwriting. She drew a diagram on graph paper of what would go where and taped it to the refrigerator and revised it twice. By April, the backyard had tulips. Red ones, mostly because Thomas had always liked red. Nora stood at the kitchen window one morning watching her mother move between the rows with her trowel and her wool gardening gloves, and felt something settle completely inside her for the first time in a very long time. Settled. Like a house after the foundation is finished. Like a sentence with its period. Gerald Cross's trial began in March. Nora attended 2 days of it. Not because she had to, her testimony had been given privately through Damien's attorney, but because she felt she needed to see it. To watch the structure of the lie disassemble itself in a room with good lighting and a court reporter and a judge who asked precise questions. Gerald sat at the defense table in a dark suit that fit him the way expensive suits fit men who have worn them for too long. Like a habit, like a costume. His face kept the executive calm until it didn't. Until the third day, when the estate documents were entered into evidence and the falsified death certificate appeared on the courtroom projector and the judge read Gerald's name attached to the authorization. Then his face did something human. Just for a moment. Then it closed again. Nora didn't feel satisfaction exactly. She felt something quieter and more permanent. Like a door that had been open in the wrong direction for 9 years had finally been closed and latched. Her mother's inheritance was released in full in May. $3.5 million, plus interest calculated from the date of Thomas's death, plus a civil judgment against Gerald for damages that Nora was still mildly stunned by when she thought about it. Grace cried when the attorney read the final number. Not from joy exactly. From the weight of what it represented: 14 years of a checkout line, a coat worn 7 seasons, a daughter who never knew her father's family existed. 14 years of hard and small and afraid, when all of it had been unnecessary. "You should have had this all along," Nora said. "I should have trusted you," Grace said. "To handle the truth. I'm not sure 16-year-old me could have handled it. 22-year-old you walked into Damien Cross's building with $17 and a folder. That's different." "It really isn't," Grace said. She pressed a hand against Nora's cheek, the way she'd done since Nora was small. "You have always been braver than you thought you were. I should have let you be." Damien had a new habit. Sunday mornings he arrived at Birch Street by 9. He brought pastries from a bakery 4 blocks from his apartment, always 2 kinds, always including the ones with sugar on top because Grace had mentioned once, offhandedly, that they were her favorite. He sat at the kitchen table. He drank the coffee Grace made, which was better than anything at his own place. He talked with Grace about Thomas. About the business. About things that needed deciding. And sometimes, on the back porch after breakfast, he and Nora talked about other things entirely. About books she'd read, places she'd visited, what she wanted to do now that the immediate crisis had passed and the future had opened up into something possible. She was applying to graduate school. Environmental sciences. Something she'd pushed aside for years because there was never enough money for the application fees. Never enough stability to think that far ahead. Damien said nothing when she told him. He just looked at her with those gray eyes and then said, "Good," in a tone that meant, "Of course, obviously, what took you so long?" She threw a dish towel at him. He caught it without looking. This is what this story is really about. Not the inheritance. Not Gerald's trial. Not the legal machinery that ground slowly toward justice. It's about a girl who had nothing but love and used it as a compass. It's about a woman who spent 9 years protecting her daughter the only way she knew how at the cost of everything else, because love sometimes looks like sacrifice and sacrifice looks like ordinary life. It's about a man who thought his family was gone, and found it again because a 22-year-old with $17 refused to accept the word impossible. Some people carry their whole world into the hardest room they can think of and lay it down and say, "Here, this is all of me. Please." That kind of courage doesn't always get a response. But sometimes, the person on the other side of the desk opens the folder. And everything changes. We'd love to hear from you before you go. Has there ever been a moment in your life when you had nothing left but love, and you used it anyway? When you walked into something terrifying because the person you loved needed you to? Tell us in the comments. Every story down there matters. Every single one.